National Accessibility Week. You are in for an informative and inspiring presentation. Please welcome Margot Brenner, Executive Director for Voices of Albertans with Disabilities, who will provide us with a land acknowledgement. Margot.
Thank you, Maison. So we acknowledge that we were on traditional territories in Alberta of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I would like to acknowledge that Edmonton is on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux, and specifically the ancestral space of the Papashish Cree Nation. In Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nation, including Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, the Tsuut'ina Nation, Stoney Nakoda First Nation. Recognizing Treaty 8 and 10 territory, we honor and acknowledge all of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have lived, traveled, and gathered on these lands for thousands of years. Hi.
And we'll ask Sam Mason to introduce Mr. Wickman.
Hello, everyone. I just want to take a moment to also let you know that we do have live cart captioning. So if you require captions or would like captions, you can turn them on at the bottom using the CC button. I now have the honor to introduce Ron Wickman, who I have been working around and with for the last 4 or so years. He is a wonderful man, and he was born in Edmonton, Alberta, where we are right now, Treaty 6 territory, and in 1991 received his Master of Architecture at the Technical University of Nova Scotia. He set up his own Edmonton-based practice in January 1995. Ron's interest and expertise is in barrier-free design and multifamily housing and urban and community planning. His master's thesis, titled Beyond the Ramp, investigated issues beyond the removal of physical barriers to accessibility for persons with disabilities. It concluded that community planning, the design of individual buildings, and barrier-free design must be considered as working interdependently to create a total environment better equipped to integrate a greater number of citizens into mainstream society. He is responsible for over 50 new house or home renovation projects designed to accommodate residents with disabilities. He is also committed to providing affordable, accessible, and adaptable housing and has won several housing competitions. And fun fact, his father helped start Voice of Albertans with Disabilities, which means we have a long-standing history with the family. And with that, I turn it over to you, Ron.
Thanks. Just share my screen here. Okay, so everybody can see the screen okay?
You bet.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, thanks everybody for attending. Thanks, Sam, for the introduction. I'm going to be talking today about focusing on accessible housing, probably at a fairly high level, as opposed to some of the more detailed aspects of constructing homes for accessibility. My background is in accessible architecture, and my thesis was indeed called Beyond the Ramp. And in 2020, I was able to get my book published called Beyond the Ramp: Accessible Architecture. And the book took a long time to actually publish because of my work. I was constantly learning new things, so I just couldn't quite finish the book to my satisfaction. But when the pandemic hit, I thought, well, I better just stop learning and get the book out, and we can always do another book, I guess, as we continue to learn more about the subject matter. And my own fun fact is that during the last 2 years, I've become a grandpa 3 times over. So life's good for Ron Wickman right now. I grew up with a father who had a disability, and that's how I became interested in accessible architecture. I was only a few months old in 1964 when my father was injured in a work-related accident, and he was a paraplegic. And in the 60s and 70s, life wasn't very good for people with disabilities. The built environment was in terrible condition to assist people who used wheelchairs, especially. There was no such thing as a curb cut. Doors were often not wide enough. Elevators didn't always exist in shopping malls, for example. And often going to a restaurant, we were going in through the back area, the garbage, meeting the dishwashers before we met the people at the front desk to get seated. So just the whole idea of having to plan strategically to get around, and needing people to always help us get up different levels and so on, just really opened my eyes to a world that seemed to be quite difficult, again, for people with disabilities. The other thing about my father is he was a strong advocate. And I was exposed at a young age to a variety of different people with different disabilities, and learned that and I still have that fire in my belly to be an activist and an advocate for people with disabilities. And I'm 57 now, and close enough to be able to say that I'm at that senior level. So my eyesight has been going, I move a little bit slower. So I'm starting to encounter all of the conditions that come with aging. Just a quick sampling of some of the work that I do. I do a lot of house renovations. They can be small, sometimes just a washroom upgrade for somebody. We can get into brand new houses that are designed to be accessible for a family that has somebody who uses a wheelchair or another disability. Infill housing has been an interesting subject, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. Working with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation and an initiative that they've had since the mid-90s called Flex Housing. I'm a small practice, so it's just myself and a drafting technician. So we tend to do smaller group home housing projects or smaller multifamily housing projects. And the one called Ambrose Place there, the bottom right-hand corner, what's been exciting for me in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing a lot of work with our First Nations groups here in Alberta and trying to establish a better type of housing that does accommodate their residents with disabilities and their elders who are so vital and important to their culture. And by and large, my presentations tend to be more for other designers, other architects, interior designers, urban planners. So I always talk to designers that may not have the lived experience about how vital it is to have that lived experience. So certainly people with disabilities understand and appreciate some of the difficulties that come with trying to navigate in the built environment. So I always encourage designers to spend time with people who have disabilities to appreciate and understand how to design better spaces, better products, better urban environments, better community design. And what I would say to this audience, which I think might have a bit of a better understanding of the world of people with disabilities, is I would encourage you to learn more about the world of builders, the world of developers. What do they look at doing to sustain their business? How do they typically build? What are we asking them to build, or how are we asking them to build differently? So we start to have to understand how they get things done, and then we can give good ideas and options that can still achieve the same goals, protecting our buildings from the elements, for example, making sure water doesn't get in, and so on. So there are ways to do it, but most builders, developers haven't been challenged with providing a building that keeps water out, but also allows people with mobility limitations to get in easily. So this whole concept of the no-step entrance is one example. And with that, I want to introduce you to some of the terminology. Many of you might be familiar with this terminology, so I will be brief. I have a lot of slides, so I'll be brief with most of my slides. But the first and simplest, or most, simplest concept of accessible architecture is what we would call visitability. And visitability just simply means that we provide dwellings that allow people to visit. Not necessarily stay and live in, but be able to stay for an extended period of time over the course of many hours. So what we need for that to happen is a no-step entrance, a wheelchair accessible entrance, a door wide enough to get through, hallways wide enough also to make way to a bathroom that would then be designed and built to accommodate somebody in a wheelchair, let's say. So those three features, no step entrance, wider doors and hallways, and the bathroom, allow a house to be visitable. And this concept of visitability really did start with our single family house. And I actually grew up in a house that would have been considered visitable. Not very good, but it was visitable. And that was in 1967. The concept of visitability wasn't really introduced to us as a concept until the mid 80s, 1980s. And part of what I did to introduce people to that concept was actually my first book, which was a children's book on visitable housing, where I went through the whole concept of how we did our own house. We modified our own house to not only accommodate our family, myself, my wife, I work at home, and our three children, but also to make my house so that people, especially my father, could get in using their wheelchair. And this was incredibly important for my father when I had kids. So as soon as he had grandkids, which I'm starting to really appreciate and understand this being a grandpa thing, I really did become kind of second fiddle to my own kids. And he loved his grandkids so much. And it really hurt that he was only able to often just drive up on our driveway. He would phone, the kids would come out, grab their treats from him, and then he'd be on his way. And when we did our house renovation and made it easier for him to get into our house, then he could visit and see the wonder and see the joy that the kids had when they opened their gifts from him. Second to visitability is what we call adaptability, or in Canada, another term is flex housing. Flex housing is essentially three concepts: affordable housing, accessible housing, and adaptable housing. So those three key terms create flex housing, which really means that we can create a house that is adaptable or flexible to accommodate the needs of people as they age, people as they might become disabled. So maybe an accident forces somebody to use a wheelchair. So we could, for example, build a house with an elevator shaft. So that shaft could be filled with an elevator at some point in the future. In the meantime, it could be used as closet space and storage space until or if an elevator is ever required. Adding extra backing on bathroom walls to allow for the future installation of grab bars is another example of adaptability or flex housing. And just making sure that generally spaces are wide enough for people to maneuver around should they find themselves one day in a wheelchair. And then the most difficult concept to achieve would be a full-on accessibility, or what's used more frequently in the United States is universal design. So this concept really is about trying to create a space, trying to create products that accommodate as many people as possible in the best way possible. And one of the ways that is achieved is in our bathroom design, and thinking of the bathroom as a wet room. So it's a big waterproof room, walls, all the floor and walls are completely waterproofed. There's a drain in the floor. There's no curbs in the shower area. So you can just walk in, you can wheel in. The shower area would be designed in a way that you could stand in the shower, you could transfer from a wheelchair onto a bench, or even shower right from a wheelchair. So this idea of the wet room, this universal bathroom space, is not foreign to a lot of European communities, used in Asia. Generally, they build with concrete, their structures, so they worry a little less about water. We build with wood, so we've always been a little nervous about this idea of the wet room. But waterproofing systems are so sophisticated and so good now that we really don't have to worry about that. So I'm doing this more and more, and really, if I could convince the building world to do one thing, one major change in the way they do things, it would be with the wet room. That would be my number one priority. And that especially goes for multifamily housing too. For the most part, multifamily housing provides a lot of accessibility. A no-step entrance is required by code. Elevators are typically in taller buildings. So it's really the bathrooms that are not always accessible. And if they're just designed to be wet rooms, then anybody can move in at any time, at any point in the future. So sort of normalizing that would be a huge step forward for those of us advocating for a more accessible type of housing. So again, just talking about some of the other building blocks that we would like to see in accessible housing. So these are generally the issues I look at when I'm looking at a renovation. These are the elements that would determine the degree of difficulty of the renovation and certainly the overall cost. And if we are building a new house, new dwelling, if we have all of these features, then our future looks fine for adaptability and flexibility and future changes and revisions to our dwellings. So again, like I said, the no-step entrance is something that I talked about. This was in my children's book, and this was our house before we did the renovation. We actually took the roof off and added a second story, and then we repoured our driveway and sidewalk so that we eliminated the steps. But you can see this image portrays what I was saying, where my dad would park his van on our driveway and then just phone the kids, and they would come running out to grab their treats. And that was really the extent of his visit. And then, of course, he could easily make his way into the house once we did do the renovations. And what I wanted to kind of talk about here with you is myself learning about the actual construction and details required to make the no-step entrance work. So because we are bringing the ground level right up to the main floor level, we have to make sure that any wood exposed to the ground is modified and protected from water. So there's some challenges there. It's not hard. It's only hard if you've never done it before, because you just need some experience knowing how to do it. But it's very simple construction. And one thing that we do have to get right, though, is the door threshold. And there's different ways to do that. You can purchase a low profile threshold that can work sometimes. We still have to worry about a kind of commercial type of threshold, which has no bump at all. There's always a chance that water can find its way into the house. So what I did in the case of my own house is I poured the new foundation for the door with a little notch, so that we sunk the door into, we bought a regular door and we sunk it into the foundation so that we could bring the concrete up to the level of the threshold, and inside we could tile right up to the threshold as well. And then there is about a 1/4 inch bump that one has to navigate to get over. Even if you have a cover over the door, if it's not enclosed, water can still hit your door and just come down your door and find its way to the threshold. And if there is no bump at all, water can get in. So it's a tricky little thing. And I found in time now that there's many people involved in the construction of this little threshold. So we have to make sure that the people doing the concrete understand what we're trying to do here and achieve. The people who supply the door, the people who do the framing and the subfloor, the people who do the finished tile work. So all of these people have to understand and appreciate that we're trying to make this bump as small as absolutely possible. And the communication then becomes so important between all these different parties. And that's where I'm finding it to be quite a struggle, is that people aren't trained to really think about this stuff until they get a job that I'm working on, for example. And then I start getting demanding over these things. So I've had to, in time, learn that all of this stuff has to happen before I can do my job appropriately as well. I talked already about the accessible bathroom and turning it into a wet room. Here's a good example where you can see to the left of the image is the curbless shower area. So this is a big enough bathroom that the shower area itself can be separate from the rest of the bathroom. And you can see that there's kind of a two sink situation where one sink is lower than the other. It's open underneath and allows for better and easier wheelchair access. If I had my way, I would have brought the mirror down a bit lower, closer to the countertop height at the lower counter myself. But still, it functions well for this client. Certainly, another thing just to point out at this time, I guess, having said that, is that a lot of your home builders will use the Alberta Building Code as their guide to place grab bars, mirrors, these sorts of things. And you have to remind the builders that the Alberta Building Code and the Barrier-Free Design Guide is for public buildings only, not residential. So with my clients that I work specifically with in their own homes, we design the homes for that individual. So the heights of mirrors, the placement of grab bars are all done to the most effective use for my client, not what the building code says. And so as a client, don't get influenced by a builder saying, well, we have to do it this way because that's what the code says. That's just not true. And one important thing too is that the wet room itself can be and look like anything you want it to look like. So a lot of times I might send a photo of a wet room just as an example of what it looks like. And sometimes people are like, well, I don't like that tile work. If this is the wet room I have to have, then I don't want it, or I don't want those little walls, or I don't want any glass at all. This is just one example. So it really, your aesthetic, your idea of what beautiful is not compromised because you're wanting to make it accessible. You can make it look like whatever you want it to look like. And another thing that you might want to do your own research on and learn a little bit more about is what we call the trench drain. So it's fairly new on the market, and it allows you to have your drain at one of the walls of the shower area rather than in the middle, a central round drain. And in this way, the way you do your tile work can be done with more options and more variety. And you only end up having one slope towards the drain as opposed to 4 when you have a central drain in a shower area. So again, I'm talking a little bit about details here that some of the providers of products are seeing that they want to create a situation where your aesthetic isn't compromised because you want to have, let's say, a curbless shower area. So one area that has really improved vastly is this idea of the wet room, and that's largely come out of the States, because the population of people over 65 in the United States, I think, is somewhere in the 60 million mark, which is far greater than the whole population of Canada. So there's a huge market for this type of thing. And the elevator I talked about. One thing that I'd like to say about the elevator that a lot of people don't understand or don't know is that the cost of a residential elevator is in and around $20,000. So you can get them more expensive, up to maybe $30,000, with all the bells and whistles, automatic power operated doors, for example, and other features, finishing of the interior of your elevator. But your economy model is around $20,000, which, if you're building a new house at $500,000 or so, that's not really a deal breaker in terms of making it work. So one thing I can say is that many of my clients have started by saying that they just want to build the shaft because they don't need the elevator. And once they find out that the elevator represents a small cost to the overall cost of the house, they end up installing the elevator right in the beginning. I've never had a client actually end up building a shaft and leaving the elevator out of it. And they see the benefits of it, because then they have family members, friends that can come over and gain access to all floor levels of the home by use of the elevator. And like the bathroom, your elevator really is just a closet space with a door, and that door can be whatever aesthetic you like. So this image shows an elevator door basically in a historic house. So the millwork is a little bit more complex and obviously a bit more expensive, but fits the aesthetic of the house. And just making sure that your interior space is designed to accommodate somebody who needs a bit more space to maneuver. So hallways being a bit wider. Generally speaking, doors are these days 3 feet wide, which is wide enough for the most part. And if you have your hallways, typically 3 feet is as little as you'll get in a hallway. With a 3 foot wide door, many people can make that turn, but 3.5 feet wide for a hallway is probably that or more is what you would like to have. And thinking about the furniture layout in spaces like your bedroom and your laundry and so on, just making sure that there's maneuvering space to turn around in is an important thought to have as well. The kitchen design really is one that's made incredible advancements, largely because, again, our aging population is demanding of kitchens that are easier to use without bending or reaching. More convenience is terribly important to so many more people now. So that fits nicely in with designing a kitchen for somebody who, let's say, uses a wheelchair. And the sky's the limit, really. You can do so many different things. I could do a whole lecture on kitchens alone, but things like microwave drawers underneath your counter, or dishwasher drawers, again, underneath your counter. These features really help. You can get pull-out drawers. You can get a pull-out shelf that is in an upper cabinet where you open the door and then you pull on a D-pull, which pulls your shelves out and down. If you have the budget, you can get them so they're all push button activated, so they're all electronically moved up and down. Your whole upper cabinet can move up and down. But the big thing with the kitchen is really to separate your cooktop and your stove or your oven. So in an accessible kitchen, or one that you want to make adaptable, a good idea is to make sure that you have the space in the kitchen that allows you to have a wall oven and cooktop. So the cooktop you could make so that you could get underneath it in a wheelchair, and the wall oven would be something that from your wheelchair you could reach in and grab something out. So with the wall oven too, it's quite important to have a door that opens to the side, and then it allows you to get the door out of the way and then reach in and grab something. So again, in a lot of the kitchens that I'm working on now, we're getting more drawers that pull out. So you might have doors, but then inside there's drawers that pull out. They're on full extensions. So the whole drawer pulls right out so you can reach right to the back. Things like corner units with lazy Susans, you can actually get them so that they are easier to use. They make them so that the lazy Susan actually, as you turn it, it can actually come out of the corner unit, and you can reach items as well. So a lot of advancements being made in kitchen design. And something that I think is quite important to think about when you're designing a space is using color and texture contrast to help people in their wayfinding. So more and more people, especially as they age, require this color and texture contrast to help them in their wayfinding. So a different color around the door trim, for example, pops out the door, or a door a different color than the wall. Effectively using color selection and texture selection in a way that helps people navigate the environment. So you're not just picking colors for the sake of purely aesthetic reasons. You're thinking about how that aesthetic fits with this concept of wayfinding. And really that's found its way mostly in the group homes that I design. I have designed a lot of spaces for seniors and people with cognitive limitations. And again, the wayfinding is incredibly important to people that do rely on these sorts of cues to help them navigate the environment. In kind of following trends, the Canadian statistics just came out talking about our aging population, and the sheer volume of people that are going to be in Canada in the next 10 years that are over 85 is quite enormous, actually. And if the pandemic hasn't done enough damage to our world situation, it's really revealed that we've never really done housing well for our senior population, and that really got exposed. So we really have to create a better kind of housing, and we really need to create housing that people can stay in for a very, very long time. So we want to be way more proactive in the way we design. So I just thought this was interesting because 2030 will be the year that I turned 65. So I guess born in 1964, I'm the last of the baby boomers, and that's when we'll. So from now to 2030, we'll be hitting a peak of the number of boomers out there, and the boomer population has really guided and determined our economic situation. So incredibly important, again, to create housing that is more flexible, more adaptable, more accessible, more universal. And then by 2050, we'll have a different situation. And what we really want this idea of accessibility and universal design to reveal is that it's not just designed for an aging population or even just for people with disabilities. It's designed for everybody. So this idea of the visitable house is great for somebody who uses a wheelchair. It was great for my dad, but now it's great for my kids who have. My phone. It's great for my kids. Sorry about that. Great for my kids because they have large baby carriages. So they find that coming to our house is so much easier coming and going than anybody else's house, even their own homes where there's steps at the front door. So we really do want to suggest and confirm that this kind of housing is really beneficial for everyone. And as we kind of move ahead here, I just wanted to show you a couple of projects that were for a competition that the City of Edmonton held. So I'm sure everybody's aware that is from the major cities in Alberta, especially Calgary and Edmonton. There has been a lot of infill housing, a lot of development in our inner cities that we talk about these skinny houses or tall skinny houses, and they are difficult to make accessible and adaptable. Just by the nature of being a tall skinny house, you almost are going to need an elevator for sure. But at the very least, these homes should be designed to be visitable and maybe flexible for future adaptations. And as we work with the city planners and city council, myself doing that with here in Edmonton, I'm kind of there to be the accessibility person or look at it from an accessibility lens. There's others certainly that do that as well. And we're really trying to promote this idea that you can't forget that this housing is also beneficial for seniors. Let's say you live in a neighborhood where you have a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house. Maybe you could live in the same neighborhood just a block away in a new skinny house and still live in the community, but be in a house that has a little less space, less maintenance, and easier to age in place in. But you don't have to move to a whole different community or neighborhood. So this really challenges the way we've been doing things for the last 50 or so years. Is we tend to have places where young people live, and then maybe you grow a little bit older and have kids, and that's where you live in that kind of neighborhood. And then as you get older, you live in that kind of neighborhood. We really want to create more of a mixed use type of situation where all neighborhoods in all parts of the city can accommodate all kinds of different living situations. So this was one example of a duplex for the competition that I designed that had an elevator as part of the use, and taking advantage of the rooftop to do a roof garden, and making sure that the house is also quite energy efficient. And then the second competition entry that I did was on a double lot where we would introduce 3 units. So it's a little threeplex. So there's two-story units, again, designed to accommodate somebody in a wheelchair with an elevator, and a ground level unit. So this is also a great concept for a multi-generational family where 3 different parts of one family could live in this triplex. And mom and dad maybe could live in the more convenient accessible suite, and 2 parts of the family could live in the 2-story home. So something that really I think will come in time, and I think you'll see this becoming more and more popular as we move forward. And throughout it all, we're making sure that it's completely accessible for as many people as possible. And I mentioned already that this is a project in Edmonton for people who would have been homeless, and we provided a housing project with 42 units that allow people to get off the streets and into a place that they can call their own. And so there's 42 units. All 42 units have their own bathroom and their own kitchen. So it really is an apartment building with staff. It's staffed 24 hours, so people have access to assistance. And it's been a highly successful project here in Edmonton that's really helping people get out of that homeless situation, and also potentially issues around addiction and mental health as well. A lot of my research when I was in school came from Scandinavia. I really think the Scandinavians are way ahead of us when it comes to different types of housing and more innovative housing. Not always ahead of us in terms of making housing more accessible, but certainly the variety and the type of housing, they're certainly ahead of us. And this concept, what we call co-housing, is a little bit of a mix of private ownership and cooperative housing. So it's not one or the other. It's not completely private housing, and it's not completely cooperative housing. It's sort of a blending of the two. And always remember this quote that was in a book that I was researching and reading. And somebody who lives in the co-housing project says, I know I live in a community, a co-housing community, because on a Friday night, it takes me 45 minutes and 2 beers to get from the parking lot to my front door. So this is the kind of living environment that I think really promotes community. And that was my takeaway from my travels in Scandinavia and the research I was doing, and trying to bring that back to Canada. And so with the infill housing, I think that's really what I have been trying to do, is create situations where we not only make accessibility, but we create this kind of community atmosphere. And so many people with disabilities, and we all really rely on neighbors to help us out from time to time, right? So this is it's definitely a positive step forward as well. And then I'm just going to finish off my discussion here with an example of a house that kind of puts all the elements together that I have been talking about. So all the building blocks that I mentioned to you already in one house. And this was a couple who were in their early 60s when they first approached me, and they had seen my house that I had done. And they liked a lot of aspects of the house. They certainly liked the fact that I was trying to make it more accessible for people with disabilities. They really liked that I had spent a lot of time and energy in making the house as energy efficient as possible. My own house, I mean. And they frankly liked the aesthetic. So my house is very contemporary looking. It's got flat roofs. We've got an upper roof deck. So again, not everybody's taste, certainly, but that was something that they liked, and that was their aesthetic. And the house they were living in was compromising their own abilities to access all levels of their house. So it was, if I remember right, it was a 6-story split with steps leading from one floor level to the other. So no matter where you wanted to go in the house they lived in, they were always having to negotiate the stairs. And then they were also empty nesters. So they didn't need as many bedrooms anymore. So they actually bought a lot just a few houses down from where they were living, and built this new house on their lot. And a very, very well-researched clients did their homework and had a lot of understanding and appreciation of the issues as we navigated through the design process. So this is the house in its finished state. It's not too far from the Old Timers Log Cabin, just off of 99th Street, still on the south side of the river in the Mill Creek area. And they have beautiful views of the river valley, of the downtown. And they have really good access to downtown as well through being quite walkable and also easy access to public transportation. So you'll see here in the image, looking at the front of the house, it does have a front car garage. It's got a walkout basement in the back, and the ground level access. So there is no step at the front door. And in fact, the garage level is also the same as the entry level. And so from the garage, there are no steps to get into the house either. So all of this makes potential falls almost non-existent. They just don't happen. So that's a real great thing. They've also found that because of the way all of this happened, even maintaining the house for snow removal, shoveling and so on, became a lot easier too. And it's kind of a little bit of an upside down house in the sense that at the entry level is the master bedroom, second bedroom or office space, the garage, of course, and then the living areas, the more public spaces are at the top where you can gain access to more light and the beautiful views of the river valley and our downtown. And this is an image from the back, the walkout. They strategically designed the handrails the way they did too on their upper decks, so that just shoveling the snow and pushing the snow through the railings made it a lot easier. So they at one time were looking at the idea of doing just a glass handrail, like glass panels, but realized you'd have to lift the snow up over the glass panels, and this just makes their life a lot easier. So they were very strategic in how they thought about not just the design but the future maintenance and so on. And really, I can't emphasize this enough. In no way did they want their aesthetic to be compromised because they were doing these accessibility features. So the view of the upper level, the highest level, is the to your left would be the kitchen and a small eating area. There's an outdoor deck as well on those nice days that you can sit outside and have coffee. And then the living dining area is all open and faces the view of the river valley. So there's lots of windows, and the ceiling slopes up, so it heightens that idea of viewing to the east and the river valley. And one thing I wanted to point out here was just how we designed the stairs and elevator. So the elevator, the stairs wrap around the elevator, so that for those that use the stairs, they walk around and up and get to the top of the stairs or down to the bottom, and they end up in the same place as the elevator as well. And so in a house, this is relatively straightforward and easy to do and is pretty common. But when you think about public buildings, this was something I experienced quite a bit traveling with my dad, is he and I would often separate from the rest of the family and go find an elevator while everybody else used the stairs. So then we had to get to that next level and then find each other again. And so this is a very progressive, positive, and democratic way of doing things, so that everybody more or less kind of uses it in the same way and ends up in the same place. And then at the entrance level, you can see that there are no steps at the front door. There's no steps in the garage gaining access to the main floor. And the main floor is essentially the master bedroom and an office space. And the lower level, they used the garage space. They built underneath the garage level floor, and that's where their mechanical room is. And then what they did is they provided space for a guest suite. So this room could be used and is used currently for renting out to university students, for example. But at some point in time, it could be used also as a caregiver suite. So this couple has really thought about the future in a super positive way to allow them to stay in this house for as long as they need to or want to. They have the choice now to stay here without having to move because of any issues with mobility or that sort of thing. And then this is a view of the living dining area, and you can see that we designed the deck. That's often a tricky thing to do. Design the deck so that it's level with the floor, so that it's easy for somebody in a wheelchair to just wheel right out onto the deck. that has its own challenges as well. And many of you that might own a condo and use a wheelchair might have experienced those difficulties. That's a whole nother, again, that's a whole nother hour-long talk just about that particular issue. But it is an issue, and it's sometimes a tricky one to resolve. So my understanding is there's no, we're not having time for questions. I think many of you probably know how to gain access to myself, but here it is on the screen for you. My phone number and my email address. My website is there as well. I'm not sure. I'm hesitating because I'm not sure whether to call this a good thing or a bad thing, but definitely since this pandemic has hit us, interest in accessible housing has substantially gone up. And so the number of phone calls that I'm fielding from people out there in the general public, builders, developers, different interest groups has really, really grown to a point where I simply can't keep up anymore. So I did spend some time in the last 2 years updating my website to have a lot more information on it. It's not a website designed to entice you or encourage you to hire me as an architect because I design pretty buildings, but to help you provide a more functional house. I think it can look awesome as well, but the information I'm trying to populate on my website is more for information purposes. So things like this webinar could find its way onto the website, for example, other podcasts that I've done or other presentations I've done. And I am trying to reach as many different groups as possible as well. So there are people out there in the general public who have their own ideas about things and their own desires about learning how to create a house that's more accessible. Builders approach it from a different angle as a builder, obviously. How can they build these houses and still profit from it and still have a sustainable business? Same with developers. Canada Mortgage and Housing is very interested in creating housing that's more friendly for our aging population and more affordable. That's always been their main mission, is affordable housing. So different government levels have been reaching out to me, and different institutions. So I may not always be able to get back to you right away, but I kind of pride myself on at least responding in some way to emails and phone calls, and I certainly will do the best I can. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I was told to kind of stop before 3, so it's 5 minutes to 3. And that leaves some time for our organizers to say a few words too, I guess. So thanks so much for tuning in, and definitely encourage you to reach out to me, especially if you have some very specific questions.
Thank you so much to Ron Wickman for creating this very informative presentation. I know that I have learned a lot from this, and I am sure that all the participants and attendees have also learned a lot from this. Thank you to Voices of Albertans with Disabilities for offering CART and ASL and making this webinar a lot more accessible to everybody else. And last but not least, thank you to everybody for coming and taking time out of their busy day to come and know a little bit more about accessibility in housing. I look forward to sharing more details about our next event with you, and I hope everybody enjoyed this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay, yeah. Any last words?